First story. My daughter gifted me a present from her allowance, and my entitled ex grounded my daughter, shattered plates at her, and refused to take her to her friend's birthday party as a punishment. Now, having a breakdown, my daughter refused to go with him, and he tried to forcibly kidnap her. I filed for full custody. I always knew my ex, Jake, had his flaws. We broke up for a reason, after all. But despite everything, I never doubted that he loved our daughter, Lily. He wasn't a bad father, not in the obvious ways. He never hurt her physically, never neglected her. But after what happened recently, I can't ignore the damage he's capable of causing. Now, I'm left questioning everything. I never wanted to take full custody. I believed shared parenting was best for Lily. But after what he did to her over something so innocent, so kind, I can't sit back anymore. Jake and I met in college. We were young and ambitious, and for a while, we made sense. He was logical, always focused on financial security, always thinking 10 steps ahead. I, on the other hand, believed in enjoying life, in emotional connection, in the little things. When Lily was born, I thought we could find balance. But Jake's strict, rigid personality only became more suffocating over time. He worried about every expense and criticized every small indulgence. Love, to him, was about providing, not about emotional warmth. By the time Lily was 5, we were done. The breakup wasn't explosive, it was the slow, painful realization that we were making each other miserable. We agreed on shared custody. Jake had Lily on weekends and for part of the summer, while I had her during the school year. It worked well enough. Or at least, I thought it did. Until now. I had taken Lily out for the day, just the two of us. I'd noticed she seemed quieter than usual, withdrawn in a way that didn't match her usual bubbly self. At first, I thought maybe she was just tired, or maybe something had happened at school. But as the day went on, I saw it wasn't just exhaustion. She wasn't excited about anything, not the food, not the activities, not even picking out a little treat, which she always loved. It wasn't until I gently pressed her that she broke down. She said, "Dad got really mad at me." I immediately tensed. Why? And then, through broken sobs, she told me everything. She had saved up her allowance for months to buy me a gift. A necklace with a small picture of the two of us inside, something she picked out all on her own. Something she was so proud of. But when Jake found out, he lost his mind. He screamed at her. She said he was so angry that he slammed his hands on the kitchen counter, knocking a plate onto the floor, shattering it. The sound scared her. She had never seen him that angry before. He told her she had wasted his money. That she should have spent it on herself, not on me. That he didn't give her an allowance, so she could throw it away on something so useless. Then came the punishment. He grounded her for the entire weekend. Took away her tablet. Made her do extra chores. But the worst part, he canceled plans to take her to her best friend's birthday party, an event she had been looking forward to for weeks. I sat there, my stomach twisting as she sobbed into my chest. She kept saying she didn't mean to do anything wrong. That she thought it would make me happy. That she just wanted to do something nice. I felt pure rage course through me. As soon as Lily went to bed that night, I called Jake. I barely even remember what I said. I was shaking, my heart pounding, words spilling out of me like venom. How could he do this to her? How could he punish our daughter for being kind? Did he have any idea what he had done to her self-esteem, her confidence, her heart? Jake barely let me finish before he snapped back, as cold and indifferent as ever. He told me it was his money that he gave her. That she needed to learn how to manage money responsibly, and that buying me a gift was wasteful. I saw red. This wasn't just about the money. It was about control. It was about the way he saw love as transactional. About how he couldn't stand the idea of Lily showing affection towards me in a way that he hadn't approved. I told him I was done. I told him I was going for full custody. At first, he laughed, like he thought I was bluffing. But then, when I made it clear how serious I was, the panic set in. Jake doesn't have the money for a custody battle. He knows it. I know it. And now, he's panicking. He's called me 6 times. Left me voicemails. Sent me messages, suddenly full of apologies, suddenly so remorseful. He claims he overreacted. That he was just trying to teach Lily a lesson. That he'll apologize to her. That he'll make it up to her. But I don't buy it. This isn't about one bad decision. This is about who he is. About how he views love, control, and power. And I refuse to let my daughter grow up thinking that showing kindness is something to be ashamed of. I know Jake isn't a terrible father in every way. He has his good moments. But this This was cruel, and I won't let it happen again. I haven't told Lily about the custody battle yet, but I have made sure she knows one thing. She did nothing wrong, and I will always fight for her. Comments. Comment 1. NTA. You need to start documenting everything immediately. Write down everything Lily told you, save any texts or voicemails from Jake, and consider talking to a lawyer ASAP. This isn't normal parenting, this is emotional abuse. He punished your daughter for loving you. That's not discipline, that's control. A grown man smashing plates, screaming at a child, and canceling a birthday party out of spite. That's a major red flag. You're absolutely right to fight for full custody. Protect your daughter. Comment 2. This isn't just bad parenting, it's psychotic behavior. Most divorced parents don't like each other, sure, but this is deeply disturbing. He didn't just tell Lily she shouldn't spend money on you. He raged at her, broke things, terrified her, and punished her. That is not normal. That is not how a loving father behaves. He doesn't love Lily, he loves controlling her, and, by extension, you. His actions show he sees your daughter as a pawn, not a person. If you don't get her away from him, this will escalate. Comment 3. Jake didn't react this way because he cares about Lily. He reacted this way because he sees her as a tool to control you. He wasn't mad that she spent the money, he was mad that she showed love for you. That kind of mindset is dangerous. He emotionally destroyed her just to make himself feel powerful. I don't say this lightly. Your daughter is not safe with him. Get a lawyer, get full custody, and make sure he can never do this to her again. Update. When Jake showed up to pick Lily up for his scheduled weekend, I knew things would be tense. I expected an argument, maybe some passive-aggressive comments. What I didn't expect was just how much worse things would get. Lily had been anxious all day. Normally, she would be packing her bag, asking if I could put her favorite snacks in, or making sure she had her favorite stuffed animal. But this time, she stayed glued to my side, barely saying a word. It was only when I heard the knock on the door that she clung to me, whispering that she didn't want to go. I told her she didn't have to, but I still had to open the door. The second Jake saw her hesitate, his face darkened. He put on that stiff, controlled voice he always used when he was angry, but trying to hide it, telling her it was time to go. But she wouldn't move. She just shook her head and held onto my arm even tighter. That's when the irritation broke through. He told her she was being ridiculous, that she didn't get to just decide not to go. And then, when she started crying, he turned on me, accusing me of turning her against him. Before I could even process what was happening, he reached out and grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she yelped. I stepped in between them, breaking his grip, shielding her from him. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I told him to let her go. He stood there, fists clenched at his sides, breathing heavily. His whole body was tense, like he was barely keeping himself from doing something worse. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed off. I barely had time to process what had just happened before he was back at my door. This time, he looked different. The anger was gone, replaced with exhaustion. There was no fire in his eyes, just something hollow. He asked if he could see Lily, but I refused. Not after what had just happened. That was when he told me he had lost his job. That money had been tight, and he had been frustrated. That when he saw Lily spend her savings on something he thought was unnecessary, he snapped. I let him speak, but his excuses didn't change what had happened. I told him everything I had been holding back for years, how his cold, rigid parenting had hurt Lily more times than he realized. How he had made her feel like her love was a mistake. How his own words had made her believe she had wasted her money instead of seeing the joy in what she had done. It wasn't just about the gift. It was about how he treated her, how he saw parenting as control instead of love. It was about how he had broken her heart. For nearly an hour, we talked, or rather, I talked, and he listened. I could see the weight of my words settling in, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or just the realization that he had lost control. And when I finally finished, he just exhaled and said that I should do what I thought was best for Lily. Then he turned to leave. Before he could walk away completely, I made one last offer. I told him I would pay for therapy. Not for me, not even for Lily, but for him. Because no matter how angry I was, I knew our daughter deserved a father who could handle his emotions, who wouldn't lash out and punish her for loving the wrong person. He didn't answer right away. He just gave me a tired, almost defeated smile and said he'd think about it. I didn't offer him pity. I didn't tell him I forgave him. I just told him the truth, that Lily deserved better. After he left, I held my daughter tight, documented everything, and prepared to move forward with filing for custody. But before I made the final call, I wanted to see what he did next. If he took the therapy seriously. If he could prove, somehow, that he was willing to change. Because this time, I wasn't just protecting myself from him. I was protecting her. Update. I never wanted to write this. I never imagined things would come to this. Jake is gone. He took his own life. And now, my daughter is left traumatized, confused, and heartbroken. I'm filled with rage not at me, but at him. At the cowardice of his actions. At the selfishness of what he did. At how, once again, he has forced his pain onto our daughter. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve any of this. After our last conversation, Jake went completely silent. He didn't reach out. He didn't fight for Lily. He just disappeared. I assumed he was processing everything, maybe actually considering therapy. I was so close to filing for full custody, but a small part of me thought that maybe he would take the chance to be better. But instead of facing his problems, instead of making an effort to heal for Lily's sake, he chose to run. I got the call yesterday. His landlord found him. No note, no explanation, just gone. And now Lily has to live with this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help Lily process something so massive, so cruel, so unfair. She cried for hours when I told her. Not just sadness, but confusion, anger, and guilt. She kept asking if it was her fault, if she had done something wrong, if she had made him stop loving her. And that shattered me more than anything. Jake's final act wasn't just cowardly. It was vicious. He didn't just abandon our daughter, he scarred her. He left her with wounds that will take years to heal, if they ever fully do. I'm furious. Furious that he gave up. Furious that he let his failures as a man and a father consume him. Furious that instead of doing the damn work to be a better parent, he chose to punish Lily one last time by leaving her with this unbearable grief. I know people will say he was mentally ill. That maybe he had undiagnosed depression or another disorder. And maybe he did. But you know what? That doesn't excuse him. He had the chance to get help. He had the chance to make things right. And instead, he left his daughter to suffer. I need help. How do I make sure Lily doesn't carry the weight of his choices for the rest of her life? How do I make sure she doesn't grow up thinking this was her fault? How do I make sure she never feels the pull of the same darkness he did? I've already scheduled therapy for her, but I don't know if it's enough. I don't know how to undo what he's done. All I know is that I have to try. Because unlike him, I refuse to abandon my child. Comments. Comment 1. I am so sorry for what you and Lily are going through. You've already made the right call by getting her into therapy, but please consider going for yourself too. Watching your child process something this traumatic is going to take a toll on you, and you need support just as much as she does. You're carrying so much anger, which is completely justified, but you can't pour from an empty cup. If you want to help Lily heal, you need to have a safe space to process your own emotions too. OP. You're right. I was so focused on making sure Lily had the help she needed that I didn't even consider therapy for myself. I've been holding in so much rage and grief, and I don't want it to bleed into my parenting. I'll start looking into sessions for myself too. Thank you for this. Comment 2. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I can't help but wonder, did Jake ever show signs of depression or other mental health struggles before this? Losing his job, struggling with control, exploding at Lily, it all sounds like he was unraveling long before he did this. I'm not excusing him, but if he had untreated issues, this might explain why he acted the way he did. Looking back, do you think there were signs? OP. He was always rigid, always hyper-focused on control, on money, on having things be exactly the way he thought they should be. He never talked about emotions his or anyone else's. Even before we broke up, I remember thinking he felt more like a machine than a person. After the breakup, he seemed fine on the surface, but now I wonder if he was just burying everything. Losing his job must have been the tipping point, but I refuse to believe that excuses how he treated Lily before all this happened. He had chances to get help, and he didn't take them. Comment 3. Right now, your daughter is grieving and confused, but as she grows up, she's going to start asking harder questions. She's going to wonder why her dad did this, why he reacted the way he did, and whether there was anything she could have done differently. Have you thought about how you'll frame this as she gets older? Because she'll need honesty, but also reassurance that she was never to blame. OP. This is something I've been struggling with. Right now, I'm keeping the explanation simple. He was very sad. He didn't know how to handle his feelings, and he made a bad choice. But as she gets older, I know she'll start piecing things together. I never want to lie to her, but I also don't want her to carry his guilt. I'll always remind her that his actions were his own, that she was never responsible for his choices. And I'll make sure she has a therapist to help her navigate those feelings as she grows up. The hardest part is knowing she'll always have to live with this wound. But I refuse to let it define her. Second story. Entitled coworker bullied me for my breast implants, then falsely reported me to her HR friend for SAW to get me fired. But it backfired and got her fired after the whole office turned against the bully. I'm 28, and when I was 24, Mom died of breast cancer after both of my nanas also died of it. I got some tests done and found that I did have some potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. And the doctor said I could either wait and see if they did turn harmful, or I could get ahead of it and get a double mastectomy. I got the double mastectomy. I was warned about scarring, but not the extent of it, and wound up with scars 1 inch long and 1/2 inch wide on my chest. And I hated the way it looked. It got to the stage where it was having a serious impact on my mental health. I felt sick seeing myself, and I wouldn't leave my flat. I went to a therapist, who did some CBT with me before she suggested seeing a plastic surgeon about scar reduction. The plastic surgeon said the scars could be hidden with implants. I was naturally big, an F-cup, before the mastectomy, so I opted to go with slightly smaller, but still fairly large DD-sized implants. They hid the scars pretty well, and I'm happy with them. My mental health improved, and I felt comfortable in my own skin again. A few months ago, I was at work having lunch with this friend of mine, and we were planning a holiday. She made a joke about my boobs exploding on the plane. The friend knew me before the surgery, and I knew she wasn't being mean, so I laughed. A coworker, Jill, overheard and, not knowing about the cancer thing, told everyone that I'd had a boob job. She hated me from then on out, and she's made a bunch of jokes to other coworkers, calling me fake in 2 ways and more plastic than Barbie, all when I was in earshot. I've asked her to stop more than once. We were all having lunch today. Amy, Jill, and a few others, and a coworker, Bob, was talking about his daughter wanting to marry this guy who has nothing going for him, and I said that Bob was being a little shallow. Jill replied, "Well, you'd know all about being shallow," gesturing at my chest. I'd had enough and said, "Do you know why I have these? A few years ago, the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a double mastectomy by a doctor, and was left with huge, ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist and cosmetic surgeon, who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first." And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. Someone from the lunchroom came to talk to me, saying Jill was just joking. I was being oversensitive and a bee about it when Jill didn't know about the cancerous cells. I replied that maybe Jill shouldn't have been a bee to begin with. It's the end of the day now, and half the office seems to side with Jill and the other half with me. AITA. Relevant comments. BASB 12. NTA Jill shouldn't be commenting on her coworkers' bodies. This could easily be seen as sexual harassment. Edit. OP, please mention to HR that you repeatedly asked Jill to stop commenting on your body, and she refused. I don't see this ending well for Jill since she continuously commented on your body and pushed you to the point of feeling uncomfortable in the workplace. OP. I don't have any record of it. I only ever spoke to her about stopping in private. The 4 times I asked were in the lift twice, the stairwell, and the women's bathroom, all places without cameras, so the only person who can confirm I asked her is Jill herself. I can prove she's been making comments about my body by asking any coworker she spoke to, but can't prove I asked her to stop. Edit. HR wants to see me about creating a hostile work environment, so it looks like someone reported either me or Jill or both. Update. HR wants to see me tomorrow, so I'll update after work. If they're dealing with it this quickly, though, it can't be good. Update 2. Some coworkers have offered to write me letters of support for HR tomorrow, basically saying that they've seen Jill harass me, complete with rough dates and times. Relevant comments. Who filed the HR complaint? OP. Wouldn't be surprised if it turned out Jill was the one who reported me. She has a friend in HR. Would it count as sexual harassment? Answer is it depends. She has a friend in HR. If the note is from that friend, or the meeting is with that friend, I would try to go over her head as fast as possible. Perhaps initiating a counterclaim, not sure if that is the right term. You may want to ask over at /r/legaladvice or /r/legaladviceuc if you are in the UK, as someone else guessed. OP. I am in the UK. The email is from Jill's friend, so it looks like the friend will be overseeing the complaint. But there's something in my contract that basically says if HR ever gets involved, I have the right to an unbiased overseer and can request a different one if I can prove the current one is biased. So if it is this woman, and I can show she and Jill are friends, then I might be able to fix it or go above her head. Verdict. Removed before verdict rendered, heading heavily NTA. Update. Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. Next day. For the rest of the day, I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest told me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a bee. I replied that Jill was being a bee long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment note. This is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email, and I'd spoken to them. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident about who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true, I was F'd. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flipped through the contract, and there was a part in the complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically, HR has asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face? And are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management. But about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously the 4 asks over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess, as they'd happened on my break, or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened, and a list of names of who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went round to everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one. But NBD. These aren't exact words, as there are 16 letters to sum up here. But the gist was, my name is their name. I work with Jill last name and OP. On date at time approx. I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to OP as quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance, and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long. Most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there, and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you, then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me, as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer. And as I said this, I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get the supervisor. The supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." The supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the four of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint, and all three of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour, and they kept asking me the same questions, but phrased different ways. So this is a really drastically condensed version. Q. You said outside that you think Jill last name reported you. Why is this? A. Jill has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Q. Why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? A. I had no issue with her. Q. What issue does Jill have with you? A. 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file, and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants, but didn't know about the cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Q. Why do you feel this is true? A. Here's 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out, and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it and rough dates and times. Q. Rough dates and times. A. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent. So no one really took notes as it and when it happened. Q. What event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? A. For me, harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent. But as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Q. Had you had a conversation with Jill prior to this regarding her comments about you? A. Several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making, and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Q. To your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? A. No. It wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend that she overheard, and I didn't tell her because frankly it's none of her business, and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. The supervisor stands up and says, "Well, I think we're done here." He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk, saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by. Then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called for a meeting with HR. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes, then come back, find a coworker, and say that HR wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters, but weren't there yesterday, are also called one by one, and are each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30, it looks like everyone who wrote a letter, or was there in the lunchroom, has been interviewed. Then, finally, Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. 4:30-ish, Jill gets called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolls around, and everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time she packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from HR. My case is closed. TLDR. Coworker harassed me over having implants which I only got because I had cancerous cells. I called her out. She reported me to HR for calling her out. I got a bunch of people to write statements of all the times she harassed me, and she got fired instead. Also, I've been told that isn't what a reverse Uno is, but I can't change it. Edit. Just want to add that regardless of my reasons for getting implants, I still should not have been harassed over them. It just happened to be relevant here, because it made Jill look like a real DCK, which is probably why she reported me. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.